Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Please go to am950radio.com, stream there. But meet my morning stars on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. The conversation is great. Robert is over there already. We just had a great conversation in the last hour about the vote, about Haiti. But now we're talking about maybe there will be a wider war in the Middle East. Are you up for it? Are you ready to fight that wider war? Some people have said 40,000 of our troops are over there. I read 50,000 this morning. I was alarmed as we're sending more and more weapons and aircraft over there with which you wage war. Are you ready for that? Is that something you want to do? Will Israel listen to us? I mean, those of us in the streets, as we make the appeal, please stop. Nobody's going to win here. So please go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, and I'm on X at Santita J. Please meet me there. And of course, Santita Jackson and friends for all these old folks like me and you, Robert. That's right. But please go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel and everybody like. That's right. I got more people watching than liking. So please do me a favor, everybody. Like, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Will this be a wider war? I guess that is a simple question. And I have people who are very wise, who really understand this. And I need some help from you, Attorney Mark Fancher, brilliant social critic, attorney, brilliant civil libertarian, author, and of course, Mike Ferner, Special Projects, Veterans for Peace. We're going to start with you, Sister Phyllis. Oh my gosh, Institute Fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies and National Board of Jewish Voice for Peace. One of the great thinkers of our time. Whenever I touch this issue, if my father asked me, okay, are you going to talk about this? Have you called Phyllis? I think that's the refrain. But you're absolutely brilliant. And more than that, so principled. And Phyllis Bennis, what is going on? Are we looking at a wider war?
Well, thanks for that, Santita, and my love to your dad, of course. We might be. I think we are already in a wider war than we were last week. Whether that is as wide as it's going to get, I think remains a question. One of the things that I think is really important while we're looking at this escalation right now in in Lebanon, we have to keep Gaza at the center. The escalation that's going on in Lebanon is rooted in the crisis in Gaza that's been going on for almost a year now. There is a major escalation underway across the whole region, much of which the U.S. is arming and bankrolling and enabling. And there's, of course, a long history of Israel occupying Lebanon. There was an occupation in 1978 for just a brief time, and then a long occupation that began in 1982 and didn't end until 1990. So there's a long history of this. But the escalation that began across the Israeli-Lebanese border since October 7th of last year, what we were seeing there is a response by Hezbollah, the Lebanese resistance movement, which is also a major political party and a major social and political organization across Lebanon, an organization that provides healthcare, education, summer camps, all kinds of social responsibilities that it takes on. But its origins were in fighting against Israeli occupation, very much as Hamas emerged in 1988 in the context of fighting against Israeli occupation in the West Bank and Gaza. So what we're looking at now is a situation where Hezbollah began escalating its cross-border rocket attacks, which had been going on for a very long time. Israel and Hezbollah both would send occasional rockets across the border. It rarely did any serious damage, even more rarely, luckily, killed anyone. And Hezbollah this time made very clear that this was going to continue in solidarity with what Gaza was facing until there was a full ceasefire in Gaza, until Israel stopped its assault. So we can't talk about Lebanon right now without talking about Gaza. And then we see what happened last week with the major escalation by Israel unprecedented use of a whole kind of new weapon, turning pagers and then walkie-talkies into weapons. This is explicitly prohibited, Santita, as you probably know. International law says you can't make something that civilians use or that children might pick up or anything that ordinary people might have. You cannot turn that into a weapon. That's exactly what Israel did. It turned hundreds of pagers that were mostly being used by various people connected to some part of the Hezbollah institutions. That included doctors, it included nurses, teachers, mechanics, clerks, very few of them military people. Because as I mentioned, Hezbollah is a really powerful part of the social reality of the society in Lebanon. And so we saw thousands, somewhere around 3,000 people seriously injured, people losing eyes, losing arms, major injuries to faces and hands. And then dozens were killed over those 2 days of using pagers and walkie-talkies in that way. And then the airstrikes began. And now we're looking at a situation where, at least as of today, 569 people have already been killed, 50 of them children, 94 of them women, 9 of them paramedics among the dead. Another 1,850 have been injured. So this is a major escalation. Whether it's going to be something that extends even further across the whole region, and whether the US gets involved while it's sending those additional troops to back up the 40 to 50,000 that are already in the region, that we don't know. And what we have to do here is to say no to that kind of a broader war.
Phyllis Bennett, how is America advantaged by being this heavily involved in this conflict?
The easiest answer to that, Santita, is we're not. This does not benefit anyone in this country.
Well, now, unless you're running BAE systems or...
It benefits clearly the manufacturers of these weapons. It benefits the CEOs who profit from those weapons. It benefits those people. But the notion that ordinary people in this country benefit from sending troops and weapons and aircraft carriers across the world to enable, in this case, Israel, to continue and escalate its assaults against ordinary people in Gaza, in Lebanon, and elsewhere across the region, there is simply nothing to that claim. There is no benefit to the United States people from that. There is to parts of the Pentagon, there is to parts of the military economy, but for ordinary people, just isn't happening.
Well, where do you see this going? I mean, could you see, should more and more of us get involved, because the numbers are close to 50,000, a lot of people, and most relatives. I mean, could it become like the opposition to the Vietnam War? I mean, of course, I don't remember that. I've read about it, and my parents talk about it. I've heard.
Well, I remember it.
Okay.
I remember it. And I remember the even more recent opposition to the war in Iraq.
Yeah.
The more difficult opposition that was existing, but hard, against the war in Afghanistan, that was also illegal. There was massive opposition to the US escalation of support for wars throughout Central America. So there's a long history of US wars, US support for wars, US enabling wars, US funding wars, US arming participants in these wars, and massive protest movements here to say no to those wars. I think that we do need a movement. There is a movement that has functioned with incredible breadth, incredible power, incredible creativity, demanding an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, that is demanding a redefinition of ceasefire to say it starts with stop the bombings now, today, this minute. It goes immediately to the US, stop sending more weapons. It goes immediately to the need to provide massive amounts of humanitarian aid. Those three things together equal a ceasefire, and that's what we need right now. We also need to say there must not be US support for any kind of expansion of this war across the rest of the region. And that's precisely what we're looking at now. The 40 to 50,000 troops in the Middle East right now have been there for a long time. We have 2,500 troops still in Iraq. We have between 600 and 900 troops at any given time in Syria. We have bases in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, in Qatar, throughout the region, in Djibouti, in all of these countries surrounding the region. And those troops are on high alert. We have an aircraft carrier that's already in the region, and there's a second aircraft carrier en route to the region. Those aircraft carriers sometimes are nuclear capable. There are US planes that are nuclear capable. The possibility of a nuclear escalation cannot be completely ruled out. Israel is the one nuclear weapon state in the Middle East, and it has the full support of the United States, not necessarily explicitly for having nuclear weapons, but the US refuses to acknowledge that they exist, a nuclear arsenal that the whole world knows exists, but the US maintains the Israeli position of strategic ambiguity, where they refuse to either confirm or deny the existence of those well-known weapons. So we're in a very, very dangerous moment. And the need for people to say no is very, very strong.
Well, the question is, will we say no? What are we looking at? I mean, you're a veteran, Mike Ferner. What do you think about one more war?
Oh, I don't think any more highly of it than I thought about the last one. Uh, and I can tell you that we Veterans for Peace continues to get not a flood, but a steady trickle of calls from active duty service people, a growing number of whom have already decided to get out of the military as conscientious objectors, and a much bigger number of people who know that their cohort, their colleagues that they know are very opposed to what's going on and haven't made the decision to get out, but they are very opposed to what's going on. So this, uh, people like Phyllis and other people have been very expert at describing how our involvement here is not in our national interests and not even national security or however you want to define it. And not that everything should be measured that way, but it's not in our national security interest to have a significant percentage of active duty people completely pissed off at the way that they and their fellow service members are being used by Israel and by the United States to prop up to keep this genocide going. So that's one angle. Another is that I was in Iraq, in Baghdad, on February 15th, 2003, when that day that people, tens of millions of people around the world were in the streets. And I was there with a contingent of international people in Baghdad, about 40 or 50 of us who had come there as peace activists prior to the invasion. And my job that day was to help draft a statement from the larger group of us about why we were there, and to put our bit into the mix about speaking out against the U.S. invasion. And the person who was writing that with me was a sociologist from Brazil, and he made the statement that I should have been thinking of, but he reminded me. He said, "Mike, this isn't about war and peace. This is about democracy. Because look at the populations of the world. In the United States and in the UK, where the governments were making the decisions to invade, their populations were turning out by the millions against going to war. And clearly, it didn't matter to the people who were governing. Well, I've come to the conclusion that the people who are governing aren't even really the people that we have in office. The people that are governing are the madmen arsonists who are running these weapons companies
Mhm.
They are the ones that are controlling the government. So yeah, this is right up their alley. They even losing wars make money. So frankly, they don't give a darn whether we win, lose, or draw, as long as we keep shoveling the currency into their bank accounts.
Well, I just don't know what to say because it's like Phyllis Bennis, we constantly end up here. I think that Americans are waking up, but we just keep looping back here. We
I was
keep
just
sending these billions of dollars overseas. We cannot afford it. And I'm seeing the anger rise in America today.
yeah.
Um,
And if I
I mean,
could add just one
yes,
thing,
no,
Santita.
please.
Sorry for
No,
butting
no,
in
no.
there,
I
but
mean, when you were talking, it just made me stop and think because I remember Iraq. I was very, very aware of that. And I was devastated as I saw those bombs drop. I'm watching, we're coming up on a year in Gaza and it's just increased. I mean, I'm looking at Haiti. Can't get a break there. I mean, it's just like, what are we doing? Mike Turner, I'm sorry.
yeah. Well, I'm sorry. I had something I wanted to interject there, and I'm
Please.
realizing two of our guests here have.
No, no, no. Please interject. This is a conversation.
Uh, the well, frankly, it was a senior moment right then. So
It's all right. Hey, wait a minute. When you go,
it'll
I,
come back.
no, it'll
Tomorrow
come
when I'm
back.
taking a shower, I'm sure it'll come back.
It is. Oh, look, trust me, Mark Fancher. Come on, we're all seniors. Well, some of us admit it. So I am. Okay.
Well, the only thing I can say is that I'm reasonably confident that there will be a regional war. I'm not sure yet to what extent the U.S. will be involved in it. I'm confident that it'll be a regional war because I guess to understand it, if you invite me into your house and once I get in, I'm a gracious guest. I'm polite. I'm courteous. I help you to wash the dishes after dinner. I am pleasant company, after dinner. And when I retire, I sleep well because I know that there's goodwill between you and between me. I have no worries. But if you invite me into your house and what I do is I immediately growl at you. I take everything that there is that I can find in the refrigerator. I don't really allow you any peace during dinner. I'm aggressive. I'm hostile. I may be physically abusive. Um, and then I retire. I'm probably not going to sleep very well because I'm expecting that at any moment you're probably going to try and retaliate or to do something to bring me under control. Uh, when the Zionists went into Palestine as in many cases guests, as individuals in small groups, and they later came in larger numbers, they were the hostile guests. They have made everybody there uh, miserable in many ways. They have been abusive. They've been aggressive. They have engaged in mass killing and murder, and they have in many ways created for themselves a paranoia that will not go away. They will frankly admit that they are surrounded by hostile forces and by hostile nations, and they live in constant fear that they're going to be attacked, which accounts in many ways for their approach to their dealings with others and their war posture that they've assumed for so long and that they maintain. And their way of thinking is different from ours. Many of us would say, well, try and make peace with your neighbors. Try and develop cordial relationships with your neighbors. But they are so deeply into the mindset that everybody's out to get them, that they are in a state of constant aggression. And for them, the only outcome in this situation is for them to demolish and destroy everybody who they believe to be hostile to the maintenance of the Israeli state. And so, yes, I think that they will use every opportunity to further carry out and prosecute this ongoing war that they've been engaged in since 1948. So the question that I don't have an answer to, as I said, is to what extent the U.S. will be involved. With respect to the military-industrial complex, there is every interest in signing on to the Zionist war. They stand to benefit greatly from that because of all kinds of things that would benefit the preservation of a state of imperialism in that region, and especially with the U.S. Tiring of its flirtation with the idea of alternative energy sources and other things, and the renewed interest in pursuing oil by both parties, then it is increasingly important for them to be in that region. But after the Vietnam War, the US population drew a line. They essentially and effectively said to the powers that be that we will no longer participate in protracted warfare. And since that time, anytime troops have been deployed by the US, it has always required extensive preparation of US public opinion. It has always been necessary to create for the U.S. the belief that there is an existential crisis that must be dealt with, and that it can be dealt with quickly. That if we're going to use troops, we're going to use them, but we're going to bring them home very quickly, and we're going to bring them back alive. The idea of protracted warfare is something that is a non-starter for the U.S. population, and particularly in communities of color. I've always said that I give full credit to the Black community for having brought the Iraq War to the end, to conclusion, to the extent that it concluded, because the Army in particular conducted studies regarding recruitment, and they found that they could not recruit in Black communities, that they could not get Black communities to send people into the armed forces. And it was primarily because thought leaders, opinion leaders, people who were influential in the Black community were telling young people, do not go. And they did not go. And they found that they just really don't have the bodies anymore to engage in protracted warfare. And so since that time, you have seen the military transform itself from a force that uses soldiers to one that uses proxy forces, either the armies of other countries, or it uses technology, drones, and other ways in which to inflict violence and to carry out this type of aggression against presumably hostile forces and against enemies. So the only way that I see the U.S. participating in this is if it can somehow persuade the U.S. public that it is going to be a limited engagement, or they just plan for a protracted engagement without saying that that's what they're doing.
AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Phyllis, were you going to say something?
Just quickly, I think that what Mark said is absolutely right, particularly about the role of the Black community, the centrality there in terms of recruitment, and the change in military posture, which we saw during the Iraq War when it shifted from mass mobilization of troops to reliance on air power of various sorts, carrying out the same level of death and destruction. I think, though, that there is, I would characterize the U.S. engagement, though, slightly differently to say that the U.S. is thoroughly involved. The provision of arms is not just sort of some additional arms. For years, the U.S. has been paying somewhere between 17 and 20% of the entire Israeli military budget every year out of our tax money. We don't do that with any other country. And right now, the reason that the demand for cutting off U.S. supplies of military equipment and bullets and bombs and warplanes, all of that, to Israel is that when that happens, the war will stop, because they don't have the capacity to continue it more than maybe a few weeks, maybe a month. They don't have the stockpiles that they need to continue this war the way they've been waging it. And that's why it's so urgent that we keep up this demand. The one thing that gives me a little bit of hope is that right now we have not only this massive movement across the country, 61% of people across the country of all parties saying we don't want more weapons to go to Israel, and a huge movement demanding a ceasefire that is defined as including an end to the US arming of Israel. And we have a new tool, we have a new instrument for that movement, which is what the South Africans have given us by their initiative at the United Nations Court, the International Court of Justice, the highest court in the world, where they have brought Israel up on charges of violating the international covenant against genocide. And that's what the court is working on now. There's another decision that the court just issued about the entire Israeli occupation and apartheid system that said the entire system is illegal and must be ended. The settlements must be dismantled. The settlers should be evacuated as quickly as possible. This has never happened before. The court doesn't have a way to implement it on its own. They can't enforce it. But it's a tool for us that gives me hope that we have a new tool now for a government that in our country claims to be supporting, well, they don't say they support international law anymore. Now they say we support a rules-based international order, which doesn't really exist in the real world. It's not written down anywhere. It's just whatever the US says it is. But I think that we are looking at a new situation that gives me a little bit of hope, because there is a movement that's ready to use these new tools that are now at our disposal. And we're seeing that at the United Nations. We're seeing the vote in the General Assembly to implement what the court says, because the court can't do it on its own. Now it's our job to carry that forward.
You know, Ariel, where's the church? I mean, I'm just, you have to understand, everybody. I get stopped because I'm trying to figure out, we've got to marshal all of these forces, because this is unsustainable. I've never known America not to be at war, ever. And the world is changing. Those who are colonized are casting off their shackles. The Francophone countries in Africa are saying, get out. They are pushing France. Look, I don't want you printing my money. I mean, the world is changing all around us, and it's like these people don't recognize. I'm so glad Dr. Stevens Eunice from the University of San Francisco has joined us. Yes, I called everybody. I didn't know who was going to say yes, but I had to do it because I'm watching the drum beats on television, and I don't know. I'm taking it very seriously. I'm taking it very, very seriously. And we had Josh Feinstein from Jews and Allies of Michigan on yesterday, and he was almost in tears. And I said, Josh, I promise you we're going to talk about this tomorrow. I promise you. Because it's enough to make you cry. Ariel?
Yeah, it's an honor to be on with all of you. It's confounding what we're watching today. And I was thinking all day yesterday that we are watching in action the manufacturing of consent. We've seen it before, but we're watching it right now. Former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett yesterday was tweeting out in English, which is always important. It's always important to note when Netanyahu is speaking in English rather than Hebrew. So same with Bennett, tweeting out in English that Shia Muslims in Lebanon, that they pay their rent by allowing a room designated for a rocket launcher in their house, which is his way of saying that targeting civilians is legitimate. And then we watch the Biden administration say, just what makes no sense in the world. We're concerned, they said, but we agree with the Israeli strategy to escalate in order to de-escalate. And, we're not seeing the outrage in Congress. I watch this and I'm ready to, I'm pulling my hair out. This is the most absurd concept ever, de-escalation through escalation. And I think, have we completely forgotten every war that we've been in? But then I remember that our military budget grows year after year. So even if we aren't engaged, as Mark Francher was saying, in a protracted war itself, we are still engaged in that war economy, and our military budget is increasing. And you asked Santita, where is the church? And I want to add, where is the American synagogue? We're at a crossroads here, and I'm a bit baffled, and I'd love to hear from others thoughts on what Israel actually thinks it's getting from expanding this. I can understand Israel's goals in Gaza, as sickening as they are, and I thought from the very beginning when this started on October 8th that Israel planned to take the top half of Gaza, to annex it. And then we've heard Netanyahu say, that they're going to empty, that they're considering evacuating all civilians, and I say that in air quotes, all civilians from the top half of Gaza, and then emptying it. And sure, that's the path to annexation, but I don't get the logic of this second front with Lebanon. And I'd love others' thoughts on that. And I think we do need to go back to the church and the synagogue and find our moral compass, right? Is this where we want to go as a country? And very much it's also going towards another Donald Trump presidency.
Well, this is yes.
I'm sorry, I could give it a stab in terms of Ariel's question about.
Well, let me let everyone know this is Dr. Stephen
Zunas
from the University of San Francisco, who's now in the United States, because I've been bugging him, Phyllis Venice, all year, and he has not been here. I'm glad that he's back.
Yes, I'm from my Scandinavian sabbatical. My sense is that that Lebanon is a way, quite frankly, of distracting the Israelis and the world from the growing demands for a ceasefire in Gaza. It's gotten the Netanyahu's failure to accept the U.S. Ceasefire proposal confirmed by the United Nations and agreed to by Hamas. That Netanyahu has kept moving the goalposts and still refuses to accept, despite U.S. efforts to incorporate many of his demands. But now everybody's talking about Lebanon. And Hezbollah, in certain ways, is a better enemy, in a sense, because they are more directly supported by Iran. The Hamas-Iranian connection has always been grossly exaggerated, but Hezbollah indeed has close ties to Iran. They also have a stronger military capability. Their missiles are far more powerful, have a much wider range, have much greater firepower than the rockets that Hamas uses. And so we can see Israel as a victim again. We can see Israel, being seriously threatened. The major cities being threatened. Iran being behind it. It shifts the narrative away from Israel as the aggressor against a largely defenseless Palestinian population in Gaza, to the victim of these outside forces that are not Palestinian that are trying to destroy it. And so I think it really has much more to do with to try to frame it politically than anything strictly a strategic military level. I mean, if they want Hezbollah to stop attacking northern Israel, they stop bombing Lebanon. They stop bombing Gaza. Hezbollah has been very clear they would stop the rocket attacks if Israel agreed to a ceasefire. And if they're concerned about the tens of thousands of Israelis who've had to flee from Galilee and places in the north, then they'd stop bombing Gaza. But that they're not concerned about their own citizens. This is a part of Netanyahu's efforts to stay in power and to shift the whole narrative more in Israel's favor.
See, I guess, Michael, I'm wondering if Americans are buying that though now. I mean, I'm listening to, I watch C-SPAN every morning, Washington Journal, and I love the fact that they open up the phone lines for the first hour. Then they, more and more, they're opening up the phone lines for greater periods of time throughout the show. Because Americans are in another space, Phyllis. They are not trusting Ariel, Mark Fancher, Dr. Juna said they're not.
Mhm.
And they're saying, wait a minute. First of all, Phyllis, let me give this to you just very quickly. The majority of Americans are neither Republican nor Democrat. The plurality are independent. They might favor these policies or the other, but more and more of them are saying, I don't want any parts of this. And I'm hearing more and more of that because the elephant in the room has been the Middle East and Israel in particular for years, but you couldn't mention it. Now that the jack is out the box, it's everywhere. And I'm just
That's absolutely right.
yeah, I mean, help
It
me.
it is everywhere. I think that what we're looking at here, I mean, I think what Stephen is saying about the narrative is certainly part of it. I think there is clearly an Israeli vision that is shared by a very small and decreasing component of the Israeli military and political leadership, led by Netanyahu, but not supported by a lot of the other warmongers who want to continue a war against Gaza and would be fine with a war against Hezbollah, but don't necessarily want to carry it out the way they are with the consequences that they're facing at the international level. For Netanyahu, the additional point is as long as he stays in power, he stays out of jail. It's a get out of jail free card for him. Whenever the war ends, he goes back on trial. He's facing 4 separate corruption trials, and he will, unlike our country, where the idea of a former president being sent to jail seems to shake people up. Israel, they do that routinely. Former prime ministers go to jail when they're convicted. So that's a big chunk of what he's doing. It's not the only factor, but it's a significant one because he maintains so much of that power. But it's also important to recognize what it means that Joe Biden, who is still going to be president for another 4 months, whoever wins the election, has made so clear his own personal connection to Israel, saying, I am a Zionist, telling the story of his meeting in 1973 with Golda Meir when she told him, don't worry about us, Joe, we have nowhere else to go, as if Palestinians had somewhere else to go after having been expelled from their land, dispossessed of their homes, in many cases 2 or even 3 times. Now those in Gaza, maybe half a dozen times. The population of Gaza is 80% refugees from what is now southern Israel, who lost their homes in 1947-48 in what Palestinians call the Nakba, the catastrophe. Mm-hmm. And in that context, the power of this image of poor little Israel that is so much in need of our backing regains a kind of credibility that it's had for a very long time. This is one of the longest examples of what Ariel was speaking of earlier about the manufacture of consent to war. This is part of how we define ourselves as Americans. We stand with our allies. Who are our allies? Our allies are the other democracies. Israel is our ally because it's a democracy. We don't talk about the fact that it's a democracy for 80% of its population. Explicitly, by law, the 20% of its population who are Palestinians, who are Palestinian citizens inside Israel, are explicitly denied by law the right of self-determination in their own country. Only the Jews are allowed that as of 2018, supported by then President Donald Trump, and now embraced by the Biden administration because he's had now 3 years and 3/4 of his 4-year term to overturn that, to take a different position. He's decided not to, not because he couldn't get support in Congress. He didn't need congressional support for this one. He just had to sign a document, and he's decided not to do it, which means it's now the Biden policy. The Biden policy is that the recognition of Jerusalem as the undivided capital of Israel, the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem, the recognition that the illegal Israeli annexation of the Golan Heights, which belongs to Syria, is somehow now legal. All of these things are now Biden's policies. And in that context, it becomes very, very difficult to mobilize congressional opposition, to mobilize church opposition, because it emerges in this very personalized way. And I think that's part of the problem that we saw at the Democratic National Convention when they refused to do the tiny gestures. This was a series, the original demand of the uncommitted movement and the protesters that were flooding the streets of Chicago was saying, we want an immediate and permanent ceasefire. That became clearly not going to happen. That was not on the agenda. So it was reduced. Okay, then we want a discussion of this in the party platform. Well, that wasn't going to happen either. Not since your father's election in 1984 and 88, Santita, have we had that kind of a discussion in the platform debate. Then it was reduced further. We want a speaker to be part of the main part of the convention in prime time. Oh, no, that's not going to happen. Okay, then we'll reduce it further. We just want one speaker on the main stage any time of the day or night. This was going on for hours every day. And the speaker was going to be an elected Democratic official who desperately wanted to express her support for Kamala Harris, who happened to be a Palestinian, and her speech barely mentioned Gaza in passing. And no, she could not speak either. And it was at that point that people said, what can we do? We're going to sit down, we're going to sit in and force people to listen to us, so that the spirit of Gaza hovered over the entire convention.
Yes.
And it was because it has been personalized to so many people in power at this point. Nobody wanted to challenge Joe Biden. Joe Biden made this great gesture to say he was not going to run for president again. And so nobody can criticize anything that he is still doing as president, because this was not just about the election. This was about a genocide that is continuing now. So that the question of what happens in terms of the uncommitted is that it's not just about how do people vote. It's about what do we do between now and the election, and between the election and the end of the Biden presidency, and for the next years of whoever is the new president. We need to be mobilizing a movement rooted in international law, rooted in the demand that South Africa has so brilliantly raised at the International Court of Justice.
But because this intensity that you're describing is not going to end November 5th.
That's right.
I mean, it's continuing to build. The reason we haven't seen these kids protesting, this, Dr. Zunas, they're shutting down dissent on these college campuses. Was it Kennedy who said, if you make peaceful protest impossible, you make violent?
It is to make peaceful evolution impossible, make violent revolution inevitable.
Revolution.
The fact is that the United States has the power to stop this. Obama stopped military offensives in Gaza by threatening to withhold aid. Reagan stopped Israel's military offensives in Lebanon by threatening to withhold aid. Biden has refused to do this, and this is when you have a majority of Americans, an overwhelming majority of Democrats, believing that we should use aid as a leverage, but it's not only rejected by the Republicans, but by the Democrats as well. And they won't even discuss it at the convention, as Phyllis pointed out. That's when people tend to go more towards nonviolent direct action. Whenever the system fails, people will do more direct action, and it can have an impact. We would think back of the shanty towns that were on college campuses, in the anti-apartheid struggle, and how the student movement brought home the way corporations were complicit in maintaining the apartheid system. Now, most colleges and universities never divested, but these protests raised consciousness, raised awareness, got people talking about apartheid and corporate complicity. So eventually we saw the labor unions joining and various celebrities getting arrested at the South African embassy. And it became a movement which was so powerful that the Republican Senate was able to override Reagan's veto and finally impose sanctions in 1986. And so, so of course they're cracking down now because they see the power of these movements. And it's not just the hardcore Zionists and everything. I mean, they're obviously influential, but it's a corporate interest because, when people start demanding corporate responsibility, I mean, that has a much broader yeah, broader implications as well. And colleges and universities are more and more dependent on corporate contributions now than they were back in the 1980s. So as you might imagine, they are even more hostile to student protest and are finding all sorts of excuses to try to do so. The tool they have now they didn't have back then was they could claim that they are anti-Semitic, therefore, in the interest of upholding Title VI or other civil rights legislation, they can therefore justify these kind of crackdowns to do all sorts of other kind of crazy things. But yeah, I think as disturbing as this crackdown is, I think we need to acknowledge that it's part because this kind of thing has been effective in the past, has potential of making a difference today.
Tim, you're absolutely right. I mean, and also with all of that activity, Mark Fancher, South Africa had become a pariah state. And I think the other piece of the Israeli thing is the anti-Semitism. That's what I fear will be twinned with that, because South Africa should have been a pariah state. They should have been. And quite frankly, Israel should be too. I'm just very concerned about the anti-Semitism that I'm beginning to see in comments, that I've been seeing in comments for some time. That honestly, because everything, all this stuff goes hand in hand, Mark. And I don't know what to do.
Well, I think that as bleak as everything appears to be, I'm very optimistic and hopeful. Because I think that one thing that can never be reversed is knowledge and consciousness as it becomes elevated. And even though there's anti-Semitism, more so than at any time I've seen, there is a growing awareness of the distinction between Zionism as a political philosophy and Judaism. More and more people are conscious enough and aware enough not to lump the two together.
Mm-hmm.
And they are very quick to point out the distinction when there is criticism of the Israeli state and accusations of anti-Semitism, to say, no, that's not the same thing. And so that awareness is not going away. It's only going to continue to rise. And I also think that we are seeing a scenario play out that we've seen many times historically, in terms of the eventual erosion and ultimately collapse of imperialism. The Israeli state and Zionism, all of that is bound up with empire. And the necessity of controlling that region for geopolitical and economic reasons, for the continuing survival and expansion of the empire. But the mistake that empires always make is that in their efforts to expand and to maintain control over far-flung regions of the planet, they don't take care of home. And the US in particular has not been taking care of home, neither the Democratic Party nor the Republican Party. And they've not dealt with the most basic things, in terms of education and healthcare and employment and poverty and all of the standard issues. And you've got a lot of people in this country who are discontented, who are angry about their plight. And so if you approach this population and you start saying, on top of everything else, we want to start killing your sons and daughters overseas, it's not going to happen. And you're not going to have the cooperation, the enthusiasm, and the active participation of people in that, particularly when they've seen the contradictions and the lies play out so many times. And so this empire is going to collapse. And so it becomes more and more desperate as it begins to recognize that the end is near for the empire. And it begins to do things that it never did before. In the past, when there was resistance, they would grant concessions to pacify the people, to pacify the rebels. And now they're running out of options to concede. They don't have as many opportunities to grant concessions anymore, because the rebellion is becoming more informed and more focused and more precise. And it's hitting at the fundamental at the very foundation of what the empire is all about. People are going after the Zionist state now, understanding what they're doing and why they're doing it. They're going after the military industrial complex. They're going after things that they didn't know enough to go after before. And now they're even beginning to reject the duopoly, the two-party system, by looking at other ways of dealing with it, whether it's the uncommitted movement or whether it's third-party candidates and other things. All of these things that were in place to keep people pacified and under control are starting to go away. And so in their desperation, they do things like shut down dissent on college campuses, using heavy-handed techniques and tactics in order to attack innocent and well-meaning college students. And the more that they do it, the harder they come at the people, the more informed people become, the more resistant they become, the more they see the contradictions of the system. And so the old saying about the inevitability of revolution, if you shut down peaceful dissent, oh, it's inevitable. And I'm counting on it because we've needed a revolution in this country throughout the world for a very long time. And so the more that they do, the more desperate they become, the more that they do things that we don't like, the more we have to realize that a lot of people don't like it, and they're going to be prepared to finally take it out once and for all, and for us to come together and to build the kind of society that all of us have dreamed about for a long time.
Well, let us not act as if Dr. King was moving toward another kind of world, a beloved community. And when we despair of all of the upheaval, well, the upheaval is part of the change. I just, believe in nonviolence. But, hunger is violent. Homelessness is violent. War is violent. Our social discourse is violent. There's a lot, fundamental changes we have to make. I have a couple of minutes for everybody before we go. But your thoughts, because I can see us continuing to talk about this because the drumbeats of war are beating louder and louder. And but the good news is that we have the power to change things. We do. Ariel Gold.
Yeah. So I always, from your mouth to God's ears, Mark. I appreciate your optimism. I want to call on us to remember our leaders like Martin Luther King, Bayard Rustin, who was with Fellowship of Reconciliation, and be strategic. We have to know the consequences and act in the best way possible. And that means coming together and building the largest tent possible. And I look to groups because I think sometimes we kind of leave out where to bring in that mainstream. And so there's some folks groups like Rabbis for Ceasefire who I just hats off to for expanding the tent, for bringing this into mainstream Judaism. Because if you talk to Jewish Americans and if you talk to the church, as we would say in America, we want a ceasefire. And it's about how we get at people's moral compass and how we strategically build that large tent and know where we want to go. This isn't just about, I hear a lot about, I'm not going to vote for Kamala because I'm going to teach the Democrats a lesson or make them pay. And I think, no, people, it's us that pay, right? It's us that pay. It's the Palestinians that pay. It's the Lebanese that pay. So let's be smart here. Let's know that our votes aren't about our own feelings. This is about how we get to a better place, how, I don't think we have any real hopes for this current administration. And I think we're looking at some really, really rough months. So let's use this time to strategize and come together and really make some change.
Dr. Zunas, your final thoughts? Oh, you're on mute. Yes.
Just let me add that I think we were thinking about why is Netanyahu doing this, etc. One reason may be that as the war expands, the war goes on and on and on, it's going to continue to frustrate many voters on the left, young voters, Muslim and Arab American voters, to not vote for Biden. Polls have shown, there's a recent poll in swing states that said a ceasefire, an end of the war there would boost Harris's support by at least 1 or 2 percentage points, which could indeed make the difference in those states. We all know Netanyahu would prefer to have Trump. And so the more the worse, more people for that. First, I think if a person's in charge right now, we're probably, I think we've seen a lot of this be, much would crack down more and more. But she's in a position Hubert Humphrey was back in 1968, and that she's a sitting vice president. You really can't go against the policy of a sitting president, especially foreign policy. So she's kind of stuck in a place. So that's why I'm encouraging people to give her a little bit of slack. But still, Netanyahu may be indeed wanting to impact the outcome of the election in Trump's favor by expanding the war and knowing that Biden will not pressure him to stop it.
Well, Phyllis Bennis, put a bow on this for us.
I think that I just want quickly on the question you raised, Santita, about anti-Semitism, which I think is very important. One of the ironies is that by weaponizing these false claims of anti-Semitism, claiming that criticism of Israel, criticism of Zionism is anti-Semitism, means we're not fighting against the real anti-Semitism that is on the rise in this country, that comes out of white supremacy, that rose in the beginning of the 20th century with the Klan. So we need to be clear about that. But the broader question, I think, comes back to this issue of what do we do now? And I think what Ariel said is very important about being strategic and how we approach this. This is not just about elections. We have to be asking the question, how do we bring pressure to bear on the current president, President Joe Biden, right now? Because there is a genocide underway right now, and 4 more months of genocide before the election ends with a new president is not okay. Yes, we have to take the election seriously. The consequences are drastically important for us and for the world. But it's also true that we have an obligation in this country where our country is paying for and arming an army that is causing a genocide against an entire population, to take that seriously and ask the question, not how do we get people who are saying they can't vote for Kamala Harris because she's supporting genocide. That's the wrong question. The question is, what do we do to get Joe Biden today or Kamala Harris tomorrow, whoever it is, to stop the genocide? That's what we need to figure out. The role of organizations like Rabbis for Ceasefire, Jewish Force for Peace are incredibly important. I'm very proud that we're giving our Human Rights Awards this year. One of the honorees is Rabbis for Ceasefire. Mm-hmm. That's all crucially important. And we need to do better. We've created this enormous movement that for the first time, the movement for Palestinian rights is not on the sidelines, is not marginalized, both within the left as it was for many years, within the peace movement for many years, and certainly within the mainstream for many years and including today. That's no longer the case. But we need to figure out what to do with that movement, how to build that movement, how to empower that movement so it becomes impossible for the DNC to say, no, you can't have a speaker. It becomes impossible for the administrations of college campuses to say, no, we're not even going to discuss the question of divesting our enormous multi-million or multi-billion dollar endowments, that becomes impossible. So that the question of ending US support for this genocide becomes not impossible, but inevitable. That's our job.
There you go. Everybody, please go to vote.org. Make sure that you're still registered to vote. At the beginning of October, more and more states are closing the door on the vote. There is a plan for 2 million people to be pushed off of the rolls. 851,000 people as of 2 weeks ago have been pushed off already. Everything that we talked about today, Haiti, your voting rights, Gaza, this expanding war in the Middle East, your vote will control all of this. I promise you. So please, if you do not get registered to vote, if you find out you've been purged and you don't get re-registered, you won't be able to vote in this particular election. So please vote, because your life depends upon it, but so many others. Our brothers and sisters in Haiti, in Palestine, in Israel, in Congo, in Yemen, all over the world, people are looking to us, not looking at us, but they're looking to us to make a difference. And we can do that. We've got to do that. God bless you, everybody. Sending you so much love. Phyllis Bennis, Ariel Gold, Dr. Stevens Eunice, Attorney Mark Fancher. I appreciate without a license. There you go. Sending you all so much love. Have a great one, everybody. AM 950 Radio. Stay tuned to the best progressive talk in Minnesota.